Hey everybody, it's Jason. I am on the part 2 of our Day 13 Intro to Classes, and just kind of want to refresh everyone on what a class is. It's an object that we create that's a collection of variables and functions. In a class, though, we call them properties and methods. So the properties are your variables and your methods are your functions. The advantage of putting your functions and variables into a class is that because a class is scoped to the instantiating object, your methods and properties will be protected, and also they get to be available to each other within the class, which is a lot more complicated to do with just functions. So starting off here, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new file called class. Cool. And inside here, we're going to start our PHP, and then we're just going to create our class. We're going to name this one my class. Now, when you're creating classes or you're naming classes in PHP, the rule of thumb is to use what's called Pascal case or title case. So every word is capitalized. So camel case is you start the first word as lowercase and then the rest get uppercase. But for class names in PHP, the rule, and it won't break if you don't name them, if you don't capitalize right. Just make sure that whatever naming convention you use is consistent and is the same when you're calling that class, because that class is case sensitive. Okay, so there's our first class. Now by default, my editor will put this opening curly brace on the first line where the class is named. I'm gonna put that down below here so we can kind of see this a little better. Okay, and now we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna add a property to that class. Property is going to be called my name. We're going to set it for me. It's Jason is my name. Now that's a complete statement, so we end it with a semicolon. You'll notice here that we have the word public. The word public is a modifier that determines the scope of this variable. So when it's set to public, that means it's available everywhere, outside of the class, inside of the class. As long as you're referencing it using the instantiated object, you can access that and set that variable. Now, if you want, you can also choose protected. And protected means it's only inside this class is it available. So I can't set or read this variable outside of the class when it's set to protected. And the other one is private. So private and protected are kind of the same, except there's one slight difference, that when it's private, it's only available inside of this class, and that's it, nowhere else. In object-oriented programming, you can inherit other classes, or you can allow this class to be inherited by other classes. So if the variable is set to private, the variable does not get inherited. However, if you have it set to protected, it will be inherited and can also, we can inherit other protected things into this class. So it's protected, only available in this class, and inherited classes, private, only available in this class, not in inherited, and then public, it's available everywhere, as long as we reference using the instantiated name. Okay, so I'm going to save that. Okay, and let's go ahead and see this in action. So I'm going to go up to my Vagrant box and SSH into it. Launch PHP. There's two things you can do. You can jump right into PHP, and then we have to require that class.php file that we just created, but because it's inside of our PHP training folder, it's linked inside the box to the Vagrant folder, which means we have to include the Vagrant folder name when we do the require, or we can just change into that Vagrant folder here, and then when we launch PHP, the CLI, then it's available to us and we can do this. So I'm going to require class.php. Cool, there it is. And then what I need to do in order to use that class, I have to instantiate it into another variable. So I'm going to say my class equals new my class. Sweet. And now I can echo out my name. There it is. I can also set Anyway, we can set it and let's figure out what's going on. So we have to make sure that we end that statement with a semicolon. Just like in our file, in the CLI, we have to complete these statements with semicolons. Okay, so I've reset the name to be Bob now, so now when I echo my class, my name, it's gonna tell me Bob. Cool, that's awesome. All right, so let's talk about adding a method now. Let's make this variable do something here. So we're going to add a public function called print hello. And we're just going to have it return my name. Save that. Okay, back over here. We need to bail out of our PHP because we can't require the class file again. And because we've already required the class file once, it doesn't have this print hello function. So that is not part of the class. It's not dynamic just because we've made a change to the file. It won't show up in our variable that we created, that we instantiated with that class. So we need to back out and then go back into PHP and then re-require and then reset. Okay, so we've instantiated that class, and so now let's just run that function. So again, my class is the object that now has the my class in it, and so we're going to access the method called print hello. When we access a method, we always have to end with open and close parentheses. And of course the statement is complete, so we end it with a semicolon. Now, how come nothing happened? Well, we're not echoing anything out. What we're doing is what's called a return. So let's modify this a little bit. Let's add echo in there. There it is, JSON. So what's happening here, this return word, it takes whatever comes after it and spits it back to wherever this function was called. It ends the execution of the code. So if there's other code after this right here, it won't do any of that. It bails out of that function. And what it actually does is it returns a reference. Like if you're including a variable name here, it includes a reference to that variable. The exception to that is if you're returning something that you've typed in, like a string of some kind, that gets returned directly. But otherwise, it's returning a reference to that. So, looking at this, what's actually happening when I type echo is it's echoing out my class, this my name. So it's not returning the value of my name, it's returning a reference to my name, which in turn evaluates to JSON. And it's a lot more efficient to do it this way, but if you want to, you can enclose this in parentheses, and what that does is it will evaluate this, and it will send the evaluation back to wherever you called this function from, instead of sending the reference. This slows things down a little bit, but sometimes it's more conducive to your code to send back a value instead of a reference. So when we talk about functional versus object-oriented programming, object-oriented programming is mutable, meaning it can change. And so when you're passing around references to something, and you end up changing one of those values of a variable further on down the line, that reference now can become corrupt, meaning it's mutable or it's mutated, it's changed into something else. And so if you want this to return a non-mutable value, then you would have it evaluate by encapsulating it in these parentheses here. So it'd be the same as just as if you had typed return JSON. Cool. Awesome. So that is the return keyword. We talked about public, and we saw how to echo out the value of a public variable and how to execute a public method. So I guess I shouldn't call it public variable, it really is a public property. Excuse me. And that function is the method. Okay. Now if I wanted to, I could change this return to an echo, and then that would actually echo something out. But we want to try to reserve echoing things out of a function to when we really need it. In this case, we don't really need it. All right, that is class. Part 2 of Day 13 classes. Hopefully that cleared some things up for everybody.